I rise to lead the debate, introduce and lead the debate at the second reading of the Securities Bill 2021. Mr. Speaker, as you may be aware, financial systems are changing rapidly. We have seen a rise in electronic trading and noted the technical changes and potential complexities brought about by the dissemination of new technologies in the financial markets. The Government of National Unity, in its effort to maintain financial transparency and accuracy, reduce fraud and law manipulation in the financial markets, notes the urgency to establish laws that would inhibit fraudulent activities. Mr. Speaker, the bill that is before this House today, the Securities Bill 2021, would replace the Securities Act, Chapter 21.16 of 2001. The new Securities Bill was commissioned by the Monetary Council of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union at its 85th meeting. It was held on the 22nd of July, 2016, and it is to be implemented in all the jurisdictions of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. And I'm talking about the 6 independent nations of the OECS, from Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as the British Overseas Territories of Anguilla and Montserrat. That is the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. The bill seeks to enhance the regulation of the sector, the security sector, by removing regulatory and supervisory hindrances to the work of the Eastern Caribbean Securities Regulatory Commission, the ECSRC, and would facilitate access to new investment opportunities by residents of the ECCU member states. The bill will allow also, Mr. Speaker, for foreign issuers to offer their securities to residents, as well as to allow for the listing on the Eastern Caribbean Securities Exchange. The new bill is also expected to create job opportunities for investment advisors by reducing the financial threshold that is currently in place. Mr. Speaker, the bill would also provide for better regulation of international business companies, IBCs, that are registered under the respective IBC's legislation in the ECCU member countries that are engaged in the conduct of securities business, as well as assist the Commission with achieving its goal of attaining membership in the International Organization of Securities Organization, the IOSCO. Mr. Speaker, the Eastern Caribbean Securities Regulatory Commission is currently seeking such membership of the IOSCO This is the recognized global standard setter for regulation of securities markets. IOSCO membership requires that the legislative framework governing the securities market in the Eastern Caribbean security system be compliant with the IOSCO core principles for securities regulation, and the ECRC must be in a position to comply with the terms of the IOSCO. Mr. Speaker, the enhanced legislation will bode well for this country. It will bode well for the region as a whole, as we collectively seek to build on and expand our legal and regulatory frameworks to be able to comply with the various international standards to which we have committed. International cooperation between authorities has been found to be an essential factor in most cases of successful efforts to overcome obstacles to tax fraud, money laundering, and efforts to combat the financing of terrorism and proliferation, that is the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Through our membership in international and regional bodies, such as the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, the CFATF, which is a body guided and governed by the vision of the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, we continue to promote and adhere to a set of standards that strengthen and maintain the integrity of the international financial system, of which the ECCU member countries are a part. With respect to the ECSRC's desire to obtain IOSCO membership, that membership would strengthen the Commission's ability to not only better cooperate with international securities regulators, but also foster enhanced relationships and cooperation with its regional counterpart regulators. The ECSRC is a member of the Regional Caribbean Group of Securities Regulators, the CGSR. But one of the main objectives for the establishment of that group is to provide a forum to discuss issues facing Caribbean securities and financial markets, and to promote cooperation among regional regulators. Most of the members of the group are members of CARICOM, and most of them have already joined and obtained IOSCO membership, while others, like us here in the ECCU, are pursuing the IOSCO membership. Mr. Speaker, this bill is called the Securities Bill, and I think it behoves me to say a little bit about securities in this honorable House. So, Mr. Speaker, what are securities? Securities are financial products or instruments issued by companies and governments to raise capital. They are generally classified into two main types. Equity, which can be seen as stocks or shares, represents ownership in a company with specific rights, including the ability to share in the profits of that company. Owners of equity may receive periodic income payments from the profits of the company. These are called dividends. And the Honorable Prime Minister, member for number 7, in one of his statements earlier, made reference to the shareholders of the St. Kitts Nevis National Bank, who can look forward to their annual general meeting in a few weeks' time in December, when they are expecting to get some dividends on shares that many of them have had for many years. So if you have shares in a company, you have equity in the company, and these are one of the securities that you can have. A second type of security is a bond, sometimes referred to as a debenture. A bond is a loan that investors make to an issuing company or government. The borrowers, the issuers, get the cash they need, whether to expand the company, give it growth, do capital projects in the form of government, while the lenders, the investors, earn a designated interest on the amount loaned, the principal. It's a fixed interest payment and a loan. At some specified point in the future, the issuer must pay back the principal. And this business of getting shares, getting or issuing bonds, creates what is known as a marketplace. And the securities market is like any other market where buyers and sellers meet to exchange goods and services. The buyers, that is investors, are individuals and institutions who have money, capital, to invest. The sellers are corporations, governments, and other investors. The products they sell are securities, including stocks, bonds, and other financial products, which are exchanged for money. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, when we speak of the Securities Bill, with the passage of this new bill, it is expected that this piece of legislation would improve the legal and regulatory framework that guides the work of the marketplace. And when we speak of the marketplace in the Caribbean, we are really speaking about the Eastern Caribbean Securities Exchange. The Securities Regulatory Commission governs this exchange and the work of other institutions that manage the securities markets. It would also assist to facilitate residents of the ECCU member countries to have access to new investment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, the passage of this new bill is also expected to provide the impetus to facilitate greater participation by citizens and residents, not only as investors, but as market participants. For example, through the provision of investment advisory and other types of market intermediation services. Greater participation would serve to increase interest in the market from individuals and businesses in the ECCU and the wider CARICOM region, and in so doing, create increased avenues for investment by promoting the diversification of investment products available on the market. It would also allow for foreign issuers to offer securities to residents, as well as to allow for the listing of foreign securities on the Eastern Caribbean Securities Exchange. It would create new job opportunities for residents. It would spur growth and development of the market by offering easier access and opportunities for participation and investment for citizens of member countries in the ECCU region, and enable the ECCU to advance its membership application to the IOSCO as mandated by the Monetary Council. I should note, Mr. Speaker, that our Eastern Caribbean Securities Exchange is up and running. It is an electronic securities exchange that operates financial securities markets in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, and I've named them out already: Anguilla, Antigua and Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Eastern Caribbean Securities Exchange is licensed by the Eastern Caribbean Securities Regulatory Commission under the Securities Act, the existing one, uniform regional legislation governing securities market activities through all our ECCU. The ECSC, that's the Securities Exchange, facilitates the buying and selling of financial products, including corporate stocks and bonds and government securities. It is the first fully electronic regional securities market in the Western Hemisphere. And so, Mr. Speaker, what then is this bill that we are dealing with today? It is a bill to provide for the protection of investors in the securities in and from within the currency union by regulating the securities market, exchanges, and persons engaged in securities businesses, by regulating the public issue of securities to reduce systemic risk and to provide for related matters. That then is the bill that is currently before this House, Mr. Speaker. It is a comprehensive bill, and it starts off, as it does, with an interpretation section that speaks to a number of definitions that enhance what was there before in the existing currency bill, the securities bill from 2001. So it still speaks about securities business, what it really means, securities exchange, what that is, physical facilities where persons may meet to execute trades in securities. It speaks to securities laws, a securities registry. It describes what a security is, a bond, a debenture, note, or other evidence of indebtedness. It speaks to a share, stock, unit certificate, and so forth. So there is the interpretation section that you find in our laws that describes what the securities would be. Mr. Speaker, the bill is divided into 14 parts, and each of these parts, or some of these parts, might be further subdivided into divisions. And in part one of the bill, Mr. Speaker, this speaks to the licensing of marketplaces and ancillary facilities. This section is further subdivided into divisions 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are respectively entitled Licensing, Securities Exchange, Clearing Facilities, and General. In part 2 of the bill, this speaks to the licensing of intermediaries and individuals and outlines the conditions for granting a license and matters pertaining to the compliance function, exemptions, and offenses. It says what intermediaries are, which are service brokers and facilitators to be able to have an investor be able to buy shares and trade on the EC Securities Exchange. Part 2, part 2, therefore, would speak to this license of intermediaries and individuals and outlines conditions for granting a license, matters pertaining to compliance function, exemptions, and it speaks most importantly to the offenses that can occur. Part 3, Mr. Speaker, outlines the conduct of business licensees and highlights the standards of conduct, business conduct regulations. It establishes the need to maintain proper books and records and to appoint an auditor. Obligations to report to the Commission are also noted in this part of the bill. In Part 4, registration and distribution of securities, this outlines the requirements for persons wishing to issue securities and guidelines that would govern advertising, delivery, and content of prospectuses, certificates, restrictions, and offenses. Mr. Speaker, Part 5 addresses the continuing obligations of reporting issuers. Under this section, the disclosure to the public, duties of directors and officers, and obligations with respect to filing of annual audited financial statements, interim financial statements, annual reports, and delivery of continuous disclosure documents to security holders are clearly outlined. Mr. Speaker, in Part 6, this refers to the governance of reporting issuers and deals with the issue of compliance with prescribed requirements. Part 7 includes two provisions relating to takeover bids and market misconduct. In Part 8, this pertains to the disclosure of shareholdings of directors, officers, and significant security holders, while Part 9 speaks to the transfer of uncertificated securities. In Part 10 of the bill, this addresses market misconduct. This section outlines restrictions with respect to certain actions, including front-running, false trading, and market rigging, market manipulation, and inducing persons to deal. And in Part 11, Mr. Speaker, it relates to the listing and trading of foreign securities. The listing and trading and how you do registration and marketplace membership and exchange membership of foreign participants, while in Part 12, this covers areas of investigation, inspection, and enforcement. This section is separated into 4 divisions, Mr. Speaker, namely investigation and inspection, assistance to domestic regulatory authorities, assistance to foreign regulatory authorities, and enforcement. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, very importantly, that in Section 177 of this bill, it speaks to the repeal of the existing Securities Act. And the Securities Act, Cap 21.16, will be repealed once this bill is passed and comes into force. I should point out also importantly, or most importantly, that the next section, 178, speaks to transitional provisions. And I should want to read these transitional provisions so that those who are already in the market should understand that their rights would be protected. It says that notwithstanding Section 177, the schedule and any statutory instrument made under the Securities Act, which is in force immediately before the commencement of this Act, shall remain in force until repealed. Every person licensed with the Commission under the former Act as a broker-dealer or investment advisor is deemed to be licensed under this Act with effect from the commencement date of this Act. The Eastern Caribbean Securities Exchange, licensed with the Commission under the former Act, is deemed to be licensed as a security exchange under this Act with effect from the commencement date of this Act. 4. The Eastern Caribbean Central Securities Depository Limited license to the Commission under the former Act is deemed to be licensed as a security depository under this Act. And it could also go ahead with those others that are involved in the securities market. But what this means, Mr. Speaker, is that those currently in business, the securities sector, will be the transitional positions allow us to see that there should be a seamless movement to continue doing your business without let or hindrance. Mr. Speaker, I've taken time to read that because we are confident that the draft securities bill, when enacted in St. Kitts and Nevis, would help to strengthen and boost confidence and the integrity in the financial market as a result of increased transparency through sound and effective regulation. Mr. Speaker, the Team Unity Administration considers this bill to be an important element to further strengthen our legislative framework that would in turn keep St. Kitts and Nevis at the forefront of maintaining a strong financial services sector. This bill is also timely as we continue to implement the necessary components to transform our economy into a digital economy. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, that explanation, I would invite colleagues to debate the bill. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.